pick a chair, any chair. Get one with a microphone that works. All right, let's begin. Hopefully everyone is ready. And again, I remind you, the candidates are among you. Feel free to have conversations with them outside. Ask them whatever you want. But we are here today with the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. And I will begin by asking you simply to give the audience, and I ask you to keep the comments a bit short because we are short on time and want to try to fit in as many questions as possible. Hopefully we'll be able to take some questions from the audience, but we can't guarantee that. Could you tell us, we'll begin with you, Ms. Flores, a bit about yourself, just give the audience a bit of background of why you're running, what you're running for, and some of those things about you that you think are relevant to what we need to know.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon, and thank you again so much for being here. We really appreciate it when people get involved and come out and actually hear directly from the candidates about what we stand for, and of course be able to address some of these issues that are important to our community. I ran for office not for some political reason, but because I understand first and foremost and firsthand the challenges and the struggles that so many families in our communities are facing still to this day in Nevada. I experienced those challenges and struggles firsthand myself as I was growing up in District 28. I was elected in 2010, I'm an attorney. However, I didn't start out as these things. I actually started out the polar opposite, quite frankly. I was growing up in my district. We grew up very poor, didn't have a whole lot of resources. But we were doing okay. It wasn't until my mother left my family when I was 9 that I started to experience challenge. And I was doing very well in school, but despite the fact that I was doing well, when I started failing every single one of my placement exams, no one noticed. And my dad was working day and night to keep us clothed and fed. And when I needed the intervention, when I needed resources, there wasn't anyone there for me. And so I very quickly fell through the cracks, and I got involved with the bad influences, the bad folks who were in my neighborhood, and I ended up on juvenile parole by the time I was 15, and I was a high school dropout at 17. And so, of course, there wasn't anything to indicate, of course, that I would be here with you today as what I am. But the reason why I am is because I had that intervention. I had people who invested in me, who gave me the resources that I needed to do something with myself, to believe in myself, to enable that I could do something different than what I had grown up seeing. And so eventually I was able to get that support and ended up in a community college, USC, law school, etc. So I'll wrap up and say that that is the reason why I ran for office. I ran for office because I believe that I'm a demonstration of what happens when we invest in one another, when we invest in the resources that pay the biggest returns for our state. And that's in education, that's in our job training and retraining opportunities, that's in creating an economy and an environment that works for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to call the attention of both candidates to that timer right there. That green card means you're good, the red card means I'm going to have to cut you off.
Thank you.
Mr. Hutchison, the same question.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to Assemblywoman Flores for being here with me as well. We've done several of these together, and it's always a wonderful opportunity to talk directly to the voters, those who are invested in our communities, those who have families, those who want to know what it is that we're going to provide for the voters and for families within Nevada. I'm a third-generation Nevadan. I've lived the American dream in Nevada, and the reason I'm running for office is I want to have every Nevadan have an opportunity to live in Nevada and the American dream that I have. I graduated from Bonanza High School. I'm the product of public education. My 6 children have all either graduated from public schools within Las Vegas or are currently attending public schools in Las Vegas. I grew up not far from here over on Bonanza and Martin Luther King at Ahern Rentals. I started working there when I was 12 years old. Before that, I was throwing newspapers for the Las Vegas Review-Journal when I was 11. Started working for Ahern Rentals when I was 12. I worked there from the time I was in middle school, high school, and college until I went to law school. So I grew up with a hardworking family, blue-collar family. My father worked for Ahern Rentals his entire life, taught me the value of hard work, taught me the value of education, and I've seen that value in both hard work, opportunities, and education allow me to live the American dream. And that's why I think we are the best as a government, is when we give everybody a chance to live the same American dream. That's why immigrants came to this country. That's what America offers and continues to offer to those of us who live here, is an opportunity to see our children do better than we did, to see opportunities for us to have good jobs, to have good economic advancement, to have good educational opportunities. And so that's why I'm running, to give as many Nevadans the opportunities that I've had growing up here. I started my own a professional firm as a lawyer. Currently employ almost 100 people. So I know what it's like to build a business. I know what it's like to take out a small business loan, to lay at bed at night and wondering how in the world you're going to pay that back. I know what it's like to be an employer. And one of the greatest opportunities to be an employer is to provide families the opportunity to have a safe environment to come to work and provide for their children and their grandchildren. So I want to see everyone in Nevada live the American dream, and that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, speaking of business, we know that the Lieutenant Governor is heavily involved in commerce and trade in Nevada and trying to stimulate that. Ms. Flores, could you tell us a bit about your business background and some of the projects you've been involved in? Have you ever signed a paycheck, or, tell us about that.
Sure, thank you for the question. A lot of people don't know that I've worked my way to absolutely everything that I have achieved, and that includes being an office manager before I returned to college, before I started college. And so I do absolutely know I was managing an office. I was given the opportunity to work under a CPA and eventually manage the entire small business with 200 employees. I know exactly what it's like to not be able to meet payroll and to figure out if you're going to take a line of credit, loan, or what you're going to do to be able to pay the workman's comp taxes, etc. Have certainly been there and understand that we have to support our small businesses in Nevada. As an attorney, I work in a small law firm, and we know that if we don't succeed at our jobs, then we very well could be in a position where we have to lay people off. So for me, it's absolutely critical to support the small business environment here in Nevada, to keep, of course, our tax structure broad-based and sustainable. That is what I advocated for in 2011, and that's what I continue advocating for in order to not heavily burden one tax industry or one industry over the other. Unfortunately, my opponent did advocate for a single industry taxation plan to take an approach that doesn't spread that liability around. I think that's flawed. It needs to be broad-based. It needs to be sustainable so that we're not overly burdening one industry over the other. And that's the way that we need to fund education in Nevada.
Mr. Hutchison, the same question.
Well, I mentioned in my opening remarks, I am a small business owner. I think there is an experience level that I bring to this job, having since 1996 had to make a payroll, had to deal with taxes, had to deal with regulation, had to skip a paycheck in order for me to provide opportunities for my employees to actually be able to be paid that week in the early days of our law firm. I know what that's like to start a business on my own and have your own risk, right? I mean, if that business fails, I've taken out a small business loan and personally guaranteed it. And that's the great entrepreneur spirit that we need to continue to promote within Nevada. I've met just so many wonderful small business owners who have taken the risk, who have worked hard, who provide opportunities. John Ahern and Dawn Ahern at Ahern Reynolds provided my family every opportunity in the world. They're the reason that we put bread on the table. They're the reason that I went to college. And those, to me, are the people that are the heroes in this country. Those are the people who give us opportunities as families. And we need to celebrate those individuals, we need to support those individuals, and we need to make sure that they're doing the right thing by way of their employees, without a question. That's one of the great things I think as being an employer, is to provide those opportunities for your employees, as I said before. But I have signed the front of a paycheck. I know what it's like to take out a loan. I know what businesses are looking for when they're coming to Nevada, looking for incentives to come here, looking for reasons to stay here, because I am one of them, and I know exactly what it is that they need. And so I think that's what I bring in, a level of experience, real life experience, having done that day in, day out since 1996.
Could you tell us maybe the first two things that you would do as Lieutenant Governor to help small business owners that you just finished talking about in this community, who see a lot of empty commercial real estate that's been empty now for about 7 years? I don't even know if some of them have concrete subflooring. It looks like they just put the walls up. So just give us quickly, if you can fit it in, the first two things you would do that you see as the most honest restrictions on the development of small businesses, especially in this community. Ms. Flores?
Well, first and foremost, we have to focus on our education. We cannot create the pipeline that we need for small businesses and business in general to expand, to be attracted to come to Nevada without ensuring that they have the appropriate workforce that's necessary to fill those jobs. We have to invest in ourselves first. And so as Lieutenant Governor, I would absolutely continue to focus on improving education here in Nevada, working with my colleagues, with the governor, with all of the interested parties across the board to make sure that we get to a place where we can restructure our revenue system here in Nevada and make sure that we can fund education. Second, of course, is to ensure that there's the appropriate outreach being made into the various communities in Nevada. We have a serious problem with the underrepresentation of contractors of color that work with the local governments, that work with the state of Nevada, and it's a serious problem. And actually, Assemblywoman Neal is here. We worked with Stephen Horsford back in 2011 to make sure that we developed opportunities, tried to establish an enterprise zone so that we can give preferences and work with those contractors who need to be familiarized with the process and who absolutely need the additional outreach to get them involved in that contracting process. And then I would also add that I'm working with the Assembly Caucus Democratic leadership to start a Nevada preference so that businesses in Nevada get the opportunity to get those Nevada tax dollars. One of the most egregious things that's happening in Nevada is we have hundreds of millions of dollars in tax dollars that are going to out-of-state companies. The Commission on Tourism, for example, awarded a multi-million-dollar contract to a Los Angeles-based company to do Nevada tourism. That's unacceptable, and we need to work on making sure Nevada tax dollars go to Nevada businesses.
Well, I agree about the education and continuing to focus on education. I hope we'll have a chance to talk more about education. But I want to focus on the specific question in terms of what two things would you do once you become Lieutenant Governor. I believe strongly, and I voted in favor of the Nevada New Markets Act. This was a great piece of legislation come out of the last legislative session where we provided incentives for private-public partnerships, where we had incentives for individuals to come in, to start new businesses, to build new businesses here within enterprise zones that have been underserved and have been underrepresented in terms of new businesses coming in. And so the state government can provide incentives, can provide grants. That's already going on. I would expand that Nevada New Market Act and expand that even more within the minority communities that are often undercapitalized. That would lead me to my next point. Without question, I think one of the very biggest problems with seeing the expansion of minority businesses within the state of Nevada, particularly in southern Nevada, is undercapitalization. Just not having the ability to access loans and funds. I was shocked to learn that in the last couple of years, I think 2012, only 3 small business administration loans were made to minority businesses. 3. That's it, to African American businesses. 3 for the small business administration. That has got to be fixed. And we've got to help improve access to capitalization. As Lieutenant Governor, I've said this before, I will be in favor of creating a program where we can bring entrepreneurs together with those who want to provide venture capital, often called angel investors, those who are looking to provide investments in small businesses. It's been very well done down in San Diego. There's a great model down there that we would follow. So you can bring minority businesses looking for capital with those who want to provide it, and then you provide incentives to bring those businesses actually to the areas where they need it most down here among our minority communities where it just has been underrepresented.
Right. Now, just to switch gears real quick, we're going to talk about the healthcare law. It states that only policies bought on a state exchange will be eligible for federal subsidies. Anyone who's familiar with it knows that we've spent over $75 million on a state exchange now that has collapsed, which means that thousands of Nevadans are priced out of the ability to purchase the insurance that this whole plan was supposed to provide. And without the ability to get these subsidies, and with us kind of being up in the air, as Lieutenant Governor, do you have a plan or an idea of how you would help Nevadans who are being left out of this market without the ability to get these federal subsidies? We'll start with you, Mr. Hutchison.
Well, I think that providing access to affordable health care is the end goal, right? That's the end goal, to provide access to affordable health care. I supported the governor's budget, which expanded Medicaid to those who needed it and needed access to health care. And I think that that was something that was important that we provide to our citizens. I continue to believe that the exchange was a problem with Xerox. The state hired Xerox. There's a whole bunch of problems going on right now with that exchange. We've had to move over to the federal exchange. But the exchange itself is part of the ACA that we need to implement in a much smarter way. There isn't a problem with providing the health care insurance to Nevadans. What the problem is Nevadans getting access to that insurance because the exchange was such a mess. And people would buy it and they wouldn't have coverage. And so it's a technological thing that we need to work on and fix. We had to go into the federal system. Now I believe we got to go back to the state system. I was involved in challenging the Affordable Care Act on a constitutional basis. The question on the constitutional level was, can Congress, this was a constitutional issue in that case, it wasn't access to health care. It wasn't whether or not you believed the ACA was good or bad. It was this fundamental constitutional question, which I fought tooth and nail. And that is, can Congress force you and me to buy something? That was the constitutional question that I fought. And I think that's a very dangerous concept. And by the way, we won that at the US Supreme Court. Congress does not have the authority under the Commerce Clause to force you and I to buy anything. This time it was health care insurance. Next time it could be, a Chrysler vehicle, a Ford, or to put your money, in Bank of America. That's a very dangerous concept. That's what I fought on the Affordable Care Act. What I believe in is access to affordable health care. I believe that we've got to continue to work on that at the state level. And I believe that we continue to do that through the exchange, which provides these opportunities, but that has been technologically a failure.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I heard a solution in there, but as far as the Affordable Care Act is concerned, I'm actually incredibly glad that you failed in your efforts and that people now have access to preventative care that they need, that women have access to preventative health care and choice, and that insurance companies cannot drop people just because, and that we are forcing insurance companies to actually put their profits into people where it matters. And unfortunately, when you challenged the Affordable Care Act, there was no solution as an alternative. The solution is that we need to continue supporting and fixing this program because we know that it works. As a matter of fact, you recently said that the Affordable Care Act was a disaster and that it was not working. And the RGJ, actually the newspaper in Reno, fact-checked that and gave you a truth meter of 3 out of 10. So the fact of the matter is that it is working, and we improve it by expanding people into the pool. We know that the more people that we have enrolled into our insurance policies, the more that spreads around the liability, the more that actually reduces the premiums. We know that health insurance and medical care costs were rising exponentially because so many people were not covered, and they were going into our emergency services and they were jacking up the prices for the rest of us because we were covering those who were not insured. Now that that has expanded, now that the market is stabilizing, we're actually seeing that insurance premiums are starting to drop. And the more that we enroll more people, the more that we spread that liability, the further those insurance premiums are going to drop. And so we need to continue focusing on it. We need to continue, of course, working with our contractors to make sure that people are easily enrolled. And we know that it's working, and I'm so very glad that now so many thousands and thousands of Nevadans have access to health care, especially those who needed it the most.
So then does this mean we have to spend another $75 million to rebuild the state exchange? And does that mean that Nevadans don't have to worry about receiving federal subsidies without the state exchange?
As far as the exchange goes, that just goes to show that a private contractor actually did a worse job than the government did. We gave Xerox $75 million. There was very poor oversight on behalf of the governor and on behalf of the executive administration that was overseeing that contract, knowing that it was reported very early on that the executive knew that there were problems with that contract, and yet there wasn't anything done about it. So we have to ensure accountability and transparency, and I will absolutely serve in that role as Lieutenant Governor to make sure that there's a watchdog, that it's just not a rubber stamp, that we're actually ensuring that if things are going wrong, that that's being brought to the light, that that's being discussed and saying, hey, we knew that we were having problems enrolling people, why didn't we do anything about it?
Mr. Hutchison, same question.
Well, my opponent voted for the Silver State Exchange. She voted for the very Silver State Exchange that she's now criticizing. In 2011, as a matter of fact. I wasn't in the legislature at the time. But after I came back from fighting the constitutionality question that I just talked about, then I voted to implement the healthcare exchange at the state level. Because to me, the state is where we got to capture the opportunities for Nevadans. And Nevadans ought to decide what's right for Nevadans in Nevada. And I don't think that ought to be delegated out to the federal government. So so I'm a little confused, but my opponent voted in favor of the exchange. She said, she criticizes now. I voted when I had a chance, after challenging the constitutionality, to implement the healthcare law at the state level because the question was decided constitutionally. We're a nation of laws. Now we come in and we implement the laws that are here. And so that's what I did. That's what my votes were. I continue to believe that we take care of this on the state level. We don't punt that to the federal government. My own belief is government closest to the people governs best. There's a role for the federal government to play, and I'm a great supporter in that role. But most of government and most of what happens in this country is supposed to happen at the state level. And that's the way that our founding fathers created this great country. That's what's made the most prosperous, blessed people on God's green earth is this constitutional form of government that allows the state to provide the health, safety, welfare, and education for its people. And I continue to support that role. Now, as far as the exchange is concerned, we got to continue to work on that, and we got to make that work for everybody. And I'm committed to do that as government.
Is character important to the office of Lieutenant Governor or any political office, Ms. Flores?
I think that's an easy answer, that's yes. And just to be clear, let's be very honest here. First, I'm not criticizing the healthcare exchange, I'm criticizing the transparency and the oversight of it. And second, that's actually related to your question. Let's be honest about the issues that we're talking about. My opponent talks about how he was a champion for education, and yet there is absolutely, and this has been debunked across the board by media, what exactly was it that he did to be a champion for education? What higher standards did he fight for? Is that the Common Core? Because he recently came out against that. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about 459 or whatever number they're claiming was added to education? It's simply not true. We cut $1 billion. The governor put $1 billion in education cuts into the budget that was approved because we could not get the support to find more revenue. Requires 2/3 vote in the legislature to not do that to our educational system. So the $500 million that he references in his ad is false. We did not add that money. That was a replacement of not even a quarter of the $1 billion that was cut from education. So let's be very clear and honest about these debates and these issues and what we have and have not done. And that is important to the office of Lieutenant Governor and absolutely speaks to whether or not that person is going to be a watchdog and be a person that is accountable to the people and that will be a watchdog for the people and will be a fighter for the everyday Nevadan.
Mr. Hutchison, same question.
Well, the answer is yes, character is very important to the office of Lieutenant Governor. Let's talk about the $500 million though, that my opponent brings up. Her party was in charge of both houses of legislature, both the state, both the assembly. Now I voted for the one thing that funded education, and that was the governor's budget of $500 million without raising taxes, an increase over the last biennium. And if there was a more education funding that you wanted to present, then you were the majority. You had overwhelming majority in the assembly. You had the majority in the Senate. There was no legislation that came before us that said, hey, no, this is bad. Let's jack up the education funding on this. And by the way, my opponent who said that she's all about education, she opposed the parental trigger laws that gives the most at-risk areas of our community an opportunity to transform poor-performing educational institutions, schools, into empowerment schools, and then empowerment schools into charter schools. She voted against She voted against, in fact, led the way against Teach for America, which would have had $2 million in funding, another 100 really good teachers at our at-risk schools. She opposed the governor's education opportunity scholarship, where private funds, not a voucher that she keeps trying to deflect to, private individuals can pay up to $10,000 into a fund. And that scholarship fund would then be used for those students who are most at risk and their parents to make a choice about where they want to go to school. Now let's give parents an opportunity to decide what schools are best for their children, not the state government or bureaucracies or somebody who's got some political interest. That's what I think is going to change education. Increased funding, targeted ways, good return on investment, but real education reforms that puts power in the hands of parents, students, and teachers.
Since we are on the topic of education, and I'll just kind of stick to the character thing. When we look at No Child Left Behind, it was there for over a decade, and we saw the problems that a lot of schools had dealing with it, and eventually the resistance came up to the point where schools were able to get exemptions from that. If we're making the same mistake with the Common Core, should schools still be able to get federal funding for whatever programs they deem necessary for their student population, which varies across every district, and we've got our own needs here versus the needs of more rural areas? Should they still be eligible for the same funding if teachers and educators are of the opinion that this isn't going to work for their student body the same way No Child Left Behind did? Who would anyone like to go first on that?
So are you asking if Common Core should still be in schools?
No. Should schools still be able to get the federal funding that's tied to it if they decide to use another program because they decide maybe Common Core isn't for them?
Well, the Department of Education adopted Common Core, so they cannot make that decision. The reason why Common Core is in place was because there was a patchwork of standards across the country, and that was making it very difficult for students who would move into one state versus the other to either catch up or to be able to be eligible for graduation. Our military children were very adversely affected because they would move so often into different districts. And so the idea was that we needed to establish a Common Core curriculum for all of the students across the country, and the State Department of Education in Nevada did adopt that. That being said, Common Core, the idea is not a bad idea. We have to challenge our kids, and we have to ensure that they're being challenged. But at the same time, we cannot ask our parents and our teachers to do so much when we're not giving them the resources that they need. We did not appropriately. One of the things that we could have done this last session, but the governor instead decided to give an additional corporate tax break, was we could have funded the professional development that is sorely lacking in our school district, that teachers need to be able to teach these new things, and of course to deal with the demands of our students and those very often environmental challenges that they don't have the resources to deal with. One of the other funds that we weren't able to fund was our teacher reimbursement fund. So many of our teachers are having to pull money out of their own pockets to buy supplies and things for their teachers, that the additional corporate tax cut wiped out our entire fund of $25 million. One of those programs that would have been funded would have been our teacher reimbursement. So it is critical that we give the teachers and our administrators in our school district the support that they need. And I also just want to clear one thing up that was said earlier. It requires 2/3 vote to get anything done regarding revenue in the legislature. My colleague knows that, he's been there. If we don't get Republicans on board to help us find new additional revenue sources, then it doesn't matter which party holds the legislature. It could be Republicans, it could be Democrats. If you don't work together to do it, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchison.
Well, I think going back to the original question, I think that my opponent's answer is no. You shouldn't be able to get federal funds if you don't follow exactly Common Core. I think that's the answer. That's where we differ, and that's where I've expressed concern about Common Core. Look, my 6 children went to the public school system in my house, right? I got 4 grandchildren who do the same thing. I went through that. Of course I'm in favor of higher standards with English and with math and literature, which is what Common Core addresses. And we've got to prepare our students for the 21st century. But the most common and practical way to do that is not to have that dictated to us from Washington, D.C. In terms of how do we get to those standards. Let's do it locally. It's like you were just saying, what about, I mean, that's going to be different depending on what's going on in the rurals versus Vegas versus Reno. And this one-size-fits-all has been the problem with education. I was educated here 30 years ago. I think I got a good education at Bonanza High School. And we did I think without all these standards. I don't remember all these standards being taught to the test and all that kind of stuff. What I remember are just really good teachers who wanted to teach, and administrators who wanted to allow them to teach. And that's what I hear over and over again, is that teachers are tired of being dictated to from Washington, D.C. They went to school, they've got education degrees, they know how to teach, let them teach. And so I think the concerns that I have, I shouldn't say I think, I know the concerns I have with Common Core are not with the high standards, it's with how those standards are going to be implemented. And if they're being implemented from Washington, D.C., I'm not interested. But if they're going to be interested, I'm very interested in implementing them on a very local basis where we control that as parents. Again, getting back to empowering parents. You go to your school board meeting and say, I don't like this or I don't like that. Try making a phone call to area code 202 or whatever it is back there in Washington, D.C. Let's keep it here locally and let's make sure that we have the funding. And I believe that all states ought to have the funding to that, federal funding, even if they disagree with the implementation of Common Core.
All right, I have another few other questions, but I'm sure the audience has some. We'll take 4 questions from the audience, and you can direct them to either candidate or both candidates, but please remember that we are short on time.
Yes, short with the question.
So make the questions brief and as concise and to the point as possible, and I would ask that your responses reflect that also. I know that guy had his hand up from before, gentleman in the back. Please speak loudly.
I will, thank you. Be very quick. First thing, this is just the first phase of what my real question is. I know a lot of people talk about, as they call it, Obamacare. Well, I'm going to tell you something. The name is Affordable Health Care Act, right? And I challenge anybody who wants to get rid of the Affordable Health Care Act to give me a solution that is better, not just say, let's scrap it. Because something, when you look disproportionately for African Americans, we're looking for health care, and something is better than nothing. So I challenge you, I'm very nonpartisan. When you tell me get rid of Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, give me a solution that is better than an Affordable Health Care Act. Because that's what I call it. I don't call it Obamacare.
So,
the second,
let's just leave it at that one. And are we correct if we say that your question is, what is your alternative plan for Obamacare or affordable care?
Really, the second one, I just wanted to make a statement there.
So was that, did you have a question for him?
Well, my question is here.
I'm sorry, it's kind of it's eating up time on the clock. Okay, let me ask someone else. You have it. Please, brief, quick.
We all thought my name's Garrett Duff. I'm one of the executive board members at NAACP.
Can't hear you.
We always talk about funding education, and my question is yes or no. Are you for question number 3 or against it?
I'm against question number 3.
We're both against question number 3.
You have a question? Or was that your question?
You stole my question.
All right, enough said. You, sir.
Given the historically low numbers that minority contractors have participated in state and city and contracting and business in general, I understand that these contractors and business owners have been trained to do business with for the longest time. My question is, or I think it should be said, that they know how to do business with the government. But the problem really is that folks in government that are doing the purchasing don't really want to reach out and give business to or opportunities to these business owners. What will you do to make sure that folks in purchasing in the different agencies actually reach out and do business with our businesses?
All right, and please limit your response time to 1 minute. Who would like to take that first?
Well, I think we absolutely need to look at programs in other states where you have seen that there has been a requirement that a minimum percentage of contracts be awarded to minority-owned businesses. And then we need to continue with the appropriate outreach and making sure that gets done. So there needs to be a look at other programs in other states where that's working and where you have seen that be fruitful for underrepresented communities. And then second, there needs to be, of course, a certain amount of transparency and accountability in those measures to ensure that it's being implemented properly and that we actually are reaching out to folks who are minority businesses.
Thank you.
In short, accountability and incentives. Accountability and incentives. We've got to make sure that we track this, and we implemented legislation to this effect, which I favored, that would track in public contracts who's getting these contracts and what is the percentage of minority-based businesses, so we even know, right? I don't even think before now we really even knew. People suspected there were different reports out there. Legislatively now, we've got to make an accounting of that, so we know if there's a problem. Number one, accountability. Number two, I'm a big fan of incentives. When I was at the Clark County Black Caucus, talking with them, a gentleman said when this came up that Don Ahern, who I worked for years and years, teamed up with him to go get a minority-based project in California because there were incentives to do that. I think that's exactly the goal. Team up with private industries to provide incentives that you get an advantage in the project if you bring a minority business to the table. So accountability and incentives.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Thomas? Mrs. Thomas, sorry.
I'm Jennifer Thomas, pastor's right here, office manager, NAACP. My question is pertaining to the Zoom schools. You know that we put the African American children at a real bad disadvantage. What will you do to teach our children Spanish? Will you fund that?
The answer is, in terms of funding Spanish, the answer is yes, I will and I have. I supported the governor's budget last session, which for the first time in the history of Nevada, set aside $50 million for ELL funding. And I think that needs to continue. Now, having said that, in the Zoom schools, though, we've got to make sure that all students are being benefited by the programs that are going to increase their academic achievements and opportunities for educational achievement. But on the specific question of ELL funding and Spanish funding, I've been a proponent of that, and I'll continue to be a proponent of it. And I think we need to continue to increase that in the future. And so, by the way, thank you for hosting this here, Pastor. Thank you very much, and Jim, thank you.
Well, I have always said that every single school needs to be a Zoom school. I mean, we cannot focus funding in that way, and where we're looking at the most disproportionately underperforming schools and say, okay, well, let's put some money there. No, we need to get to a point where we can fund every single school at the level that's appropriate for that school. And in terms of doing something about it, because I am one of the most effective legislators in Carson City. More than 75% of the legislation that I have introduced or co-sponsored has been signed into law under a Republican governor. So I am very good at my job. I'm proud of my record. And so I don't just talk about things and not talk about solutions. We have talked about and have sent a proposal to the governor about how to equitably fund education in Nevada so that we're not having this conversation next year about some kids benefiting and some kids not benefiting, or some benefiting more than the others. We're talking about funding each child based on the various needs that they have and making sure that all of those needs are addressed regardless of where you happen to go to school.
Thank you. I will ask, I know we said we're going to take 4 questions, but I see 2 that I was going to finish with. Do we have time to do that? Do we have time to do that? Are we good? Can we do that? You sure with that?
Yes, hi, Ricky Towers, Transport Workers Union.
Can you speak as loud as possible?
Ricky Towers, Transport Workers Union, Local 721. I represent casino dealers at the Wynn, Caesars, Bally's, Paris, and Harris. My question is youth unemployment in the Black community and how your office will work in the tourism area to develop an infrastructure. The biggest problem in West Las Vegas is infrastructure. 40 million tourists, 4 million African Americans coming to Las Vegas, 8 billion in revenue, and 800 million in revenue spent by African Americans. How will your office work with the community to develop some tourism opportunities for West Las Vegas so we can take advantage of the 800 million in revenue that African Americans are spending on the Strip?
All right, thank you. Ms. Waters? Yeah.
Well, public-private partnerships are critically important. I've always said that in this office, All it takes is someone with some vision and some energy and desire to get things done, and to be able to partner with the various organizations that exist to make sure that we are putting the efforts and the energy where it needs to be in order to encourage training and exposure and opportunities for especially our at-risk youth or our underrepresented youth. One of the very easy ways in which you can give underrepresented youth an opportunity to have exposure to government and to tourism leaders and people who are successful in the community is to create an internship program. One of the very first things that we did when we established the Hispanic Caucus in the legislature was to create a very vibrant and robust paid internship program so that those kids can have an opportunity to learn skills and also get paid at the same time. The Lieutenant Governor's office has a budget to do that, but they have not done that in the past. Also is just focusing again on working with community-based organizations to expand those opportunities.
Thank you. We have to hurry. Please.
Just very quickly, great question. I think it comes down to marketing and incentives. Because you've got, as the chairman on the Commission on Tourism, you've got a budget within which you can work. And where you spend those advertising dollars, and we are great in Las Vegas about coming up with great slogans and getting people here. Why can't we focus more of that and in a targeted way on getting minority-based business here? I mean, I think the NAACP having their convention was a wonderful start, was a wonderful boost to this economy, and was a great example of what you're talking about, which is let's go after some very specific conventions, let's go after some very specific businesses, and let's advertise and go get them in a very competitive way and tell them we want them here.
I hope you didn't take that the wrong way. It's just I didn't want you to start on a whole other line of thought with little time left. You will be getting your closing statements once we get this final question.
All right, quick question for both of you. You both talked about education. I want to hear from you first, Ms. Flores, because you talk about spending more money in education. It's not how much money you spend, it's accountability. How do you feel about school choice, school vouchers, charter schools? Both of you.
I don't support school vouchers. School vouchers unfortunately benefits those folks who can already afford private school. You have to even out the playing field first. You have to make sure that private schools will accept anyone and everyone, and that's not the case with vouchers. It also doesn't address transportation needs. It doesn't address a whole lot of other issues that exist that our public schools do have to address that vouchers do not force private schools to address. Unfortunately, we say choice, but the choice still remains with the private school. They're the person who gets to choose which kid comes in and out, regardless of who has a voucher. As far as charter schools are concerned, I think that we do have to be flexible and reasonable in our approach. I support charter schools. I supported accountability with charter schools to make sure that we're getting best use of our tax dollars, so that those organizations who are getting tax dollars are using them to actually educate our kids. And unfortunately, there was a lot of charter schools who weren't doing very well at all. And so we needed to make sure there was accountability there. And so I supported that and support additional funding for the establishment of charter school loans. I did vote in support of that. And I think those were your two questions.
I am very much in favor of school choice. I'll say it again, I've said it before. The fundamental power ought to be with parents, teachers, and students. That's where the fundamental power ought to be. And every policy that we can drive to make that a reality for everybody in Nevada is what I think we ought to be doing. That includes the governor's, he'll raise it again. If I'm elected lieutenant governor, I'll support it. If my opponent is, she'll oppose it again. Which is, education opportunity scholarships, private funds, $10,000 fund. Give parents an opportunity to take that money, take their children to the school that they want to go to, and give them a choice. They can keep them in the public schools that they're currently zoned for, but it's a choice that they'll have. It's going to expand the opportunities for those who just need it the most. I'm a big fan of charter schools. I'm a fan of all of the above approach, but I am fundamentally and most enthusiastic of funding public education. I'm a fan of public education. I'm a product of public education. My 6 children are publicly educated, and we've got to strengthen public education. But we've got to do that through healthy competition and other opportunities. That's the way other states have done it. Targeted funding increases and school choice.
The time is now, it's 2 o'clock. We did have other questions. We had one that was submitted, but we're on everyone else's schedule. If you could, both of you summarize your positions to fully inform the voters how your policies, your actions, and your views relates directly to this community in particular, some of the plans that you may have, and see if you can keep it in 1 minute. So please, I don't want to interrupt anyone, but let's do it. Who wants to go first?
I've been going first the entire time, why not? Let's continue doing so.
Then Mr. Hutchison.
Ladies before gentlemen.
Yeah. If you want me.
No, I'm ready. Look, I was born ready. Ultimately, I hope that I can continue earning, first and foremost, the support of every single Nevadan, and that I have demonstrated that I am the person who is going to work tooth and nail every single day for the everyday Nevadan. I very much know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to need resources and not have them, and I know exactly where we need to invest and where those investments pay the biggest returns. There needs to be accountability, there needs to be transparency, and there needs to be someone in the Lieutenant Governor's office who is not going to be a rubber stamp and who is going to vehemently work for the everyday Nevadan, and someone who truly understands what it's like to be disenfranchised or to need resources and not have them. I know what it's like through real life experience and also through professional experience, what it's like to also be effective at doing a good job. I have demonstrated that, I will continue to demonstrate that, and I will continue to do, of course, a good job if I'm so privileged as to be elected Lieutenant Governor. So I very much appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so very much.
I want to thank everybody for being here and the opportunity that we have to discuss ideas and exchange ideas. I want to thank again Assemblywoman Flores for being here with me. It's always great to be with her and to share some ideas. I'll end where I began, which is I've lived the American dream in Nevada. And I want every single Nevadan to have an opportunity to live the American dream through great opportunities with economic issues, a good job, strong families, and quality education. You give somebody a good job, you give somebody a quality education, well, I'll tell you what, a lot of the challenges that we face in Nevada go away. And that's where we are when we are best as a government, is providing economic opportunities and a good job for everybody who wants one, and a quality, high educational opportunity for our children to make that an upward mobile opportunity for them in the future. That's the promise of the American dream, and that's what we got to continue to fight for as Nevadans, and as Lieutenant Governor, that's exactly what I will deliver. Thank you.
That being said, I would like to thank the candidates for taking the time to come out here and participate in this event and helping to educate the electorate in your views so that everyone here can make a better decision, a more informed decision regarding who we want to trust to put in a position to spend our money and try to tell us what to do, even though some of us weren't going to listen anyway. That being said, thank you both. Have a great day. And I would like to thank the audience for coming out, and especially big thanks to Pastor Thomas and Jennifer Thomas, Mrs. Thomas. You're going to give us a benediction prayer so that we can close this event out. Thank you all today for being here.
Truly, again, it's a pleasure hosting this event. Come on, we're standing. We're about to be dismissed. If you still have some further comments or questions or like some information, I believe that some of these candidates will stick around to speak with you. Let's pray. Most holy and everlasting God, our Father, we're just thankful for the opportunity that you afforded us to enter into your house of worship to discuss matters of public interest. That's what the ecclesia is for, called out concerned citizens to deal with matters of public interest. That is the church, and we're thankful for these individuals that represent the church. And we're asking you now, God, to give each candidate guidance, give them wisdom. You said in the multitude of counsel there is safety. So we're thankful, Lord God, for this opportunity, and we pray that you will continue to guide us in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. You're dismissed.